So I'm here with Anders Olsson. Thank you very much, Anders, for taking the time and talking to me.
Thank you, Julia. I'm happy to be on your show.
So you are one of the leading experts on breathing, and I was wondering, like, what led you to that path? How did you discover that you were interested in breathing?
That was when I read a book, How to Get Rid of Your Asthma for Good by Changing Your Breathing Habits. And I didn't have problems with asthma. My problem was a racing mind. And almost immediately when applying the tips and tools and techniques in the book, I experienced how I was able to calm down, unlock my turbo and be more present, be more content and harmonious. And I'm not exaggerating when saying that it changed my life.
Wow. And how long ago was that? Do you remember?
That was in 2009.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And but why did you get interested in asthma? I mean, even if you didn't have it, like, did you just find a book laying around, or?
Well, actually, I was translating a few health books from English to Swedish at the time, and looking for a new book. I've always thought breathing. I mean, we can go without food for weeks, without water for days, but without breathing for only for minutes. So it was always in the back of my mind that breathing has to be the most important bodily function. And whenever I spoke to knowledgeable people, doctors or therapists, and they agreed, yes, breathing is very important. But no one could really add anything more than that. Yeah, breathing is important. But hey, let's now talk about exercise or sleep or supplements or whatever.
Yeah.
And, so I was always searching for something related to breathing. And when I found it, I realized, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been thinking. And I noticed the effect on myself. And then I started to terrorize people around me, asking them to do the same. And they got similar effect. And it didn't take long before I realized that this is going to be my thing. I'm going to spread this concept. I formed the conscious breathing concept, and I want to spread it to other people around the world.
Yeah, beautiful. What did you do before, if I may ask, before you got into breathing?
Yes, I'm the typical entrepreneur. I think it goes well hand in hand with this always on the go, trying to improve things, racing mind, thinking a lot, have long to-do list. I think being an entrepreneur, I started my own company when I was 19, and it fed my adrenaline addiction. So I was addicted to the stress, and it was a perfect match working around the clock. So I started off importing computers actually from Taiwan.
Okay.
So I built this IT company, you can say, and then I got bored of it, basically. I had fulfilled my dreams, earning a lot of money and ticking the success box, so to say, and it didn't fulfill me. I didn't feel that I learned anything new, so I sold it and then switched to health.
Yeah, that's sometimes a very good way, because then you also have different, mindset about health.
Yeah.
Because because we are also, like, we didn't come from the health field when we started out. So I think sometimes that gives you just another way of thinking to solve problems, or and I guess with breathing, that is also something that's super helpful, to just approach a subject from a different maybe mindset.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays the breathing is very popular, or fashionable even.
Yeah.
But back in the days, no, as you said, like, people said, yeah, it's important, but they didn't know why or couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So what would you say is like one thing that you talk about is the nasal breathing?
Yeah.
What is important about it, or what are the benefits if somebody breathes through the nose?
So in my view, our nose is the most underestimated organ we have. It has so many benefits. Mouth is for eating. The nose is for breathing, period. One of the positive effects of nasal breathing is that it helps keep the airways and lungs moist. You know, the lungs, they are 80% water. That is a huge amount, but it's needed in order to facilitate the gas exchange, where the oxygen we inhale should be transferred over to the blood, and the carbon dioxide produced in our body should be transferred to the lungs, and we exhale it. And if the water levels go down in the lungs, we are in problem. And it turns out that when you exhale through the mouth, you lose 42% more water compared to exhaling through the nose. A study showed that, and it's very easy to test. We both live in countries where it's cold in the winter, so you can easily go out when it's cold and you do this, the winter breath. Mm-hmm. And if you do it through the mouth, there will be a big cloud, and that is basically heat and water. And if you try doing it instead through the nose, you will notice that there will be almost no cloud at all, because the construction of the nose will retain the water and the heat in your body. Mm-hmm. That is one of the examples of nasal breathing, the benefits. And also it prepares the air for the airways and the lungs. So the nose typically warms, humidifies the air we inhale, because in our body we have the body temperature 37 degrees, right? And it's rarely that the air we inhale is so warm, and it's rarely that it's so humid, 100% humid in the lungs. So that is taken care of in the nose, preparing the air for the lungs. And also a lot of the virus, bacteria, fungi, other particles that we inhale constantly. And researchers tell us that we inhale up towards 100 billion particles in a single day. And most of them are trapped in our nose because of the construction of the nose. So imagine breathing in and out through the mouth. You will then inhale cold, dry air full of these virus, bacteria, and other particles. And that will make the airways irritated, inflamed, swollen, meaning it will be harder to breathe. So you have to use more power in order to move the air in and out of the lungs. And since we're doing this 1,000 times an hour, over time it will have an effect, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So the more efficient we can make our breathing, the better, the more the body can relax. So we discussed earlier about this book about asthma. So asthma medication, that's a good example of how mouth breathing leads to increased stress, because the asthma medication contains, there are mainly two types of asthma medication. One containing cortisol to reduce the inflammations in the throat and airways. And the other is adrenaline, because adrenaline has a widening effect on the airways. So when we have narrow airways, whether that is a stuffy nose or things like that in our throat or further down in our lungs, automatically the stress levels will be higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that means by nasal breathing you can reduce your stress.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Yeah, very interesting. The thing is, like, while we are awake, we can kind of control it.
Yeah.
But what happens at night when we're sleeping? I think, like, when you observe people in the train or wherever they fall asleep, sometimes you see like their mouth is wide open.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit more
common,
difficult to control.
So then we recommend people to tape their mouth shut at night.
Okay.
Yeah. Some may think that is barbaric, but I have to say that when we started, we launched, I think, what was the world's first product, the sleep tape, in 2013, aimed at taping your mouth shut at night. people were a bit skeptic, but now it's starting to become more and more, as you said, even fashion sometimes. So it's not, I wouldn't say that it's a trend even, it's here to stay. The idea that taping your mouth shut at night is actually beneficial to ensure nasal breathing while sleeping, and thereby getting the deep, rejuvenating, recovering, healing sleep that our body wants and craves and needs. And mouth breathing at rest actually means that we are engaging in a low-grade form of hyperventilating. Not only do we get more of the irritated airways, typical signs of mouth breathing at night is that you wake up with a dry mouth. You need to have a glass of water at the bedside table, or you have restless sleep. You fidget, you move around, or you have nightmares even, or you have a low energy in the morning when you wake, like you have a hangover, or like you have only slept for 3 hours. And a lot of people testify to, just by putting a simple piece of tape on the mouth when going to sleep, that they can counter these negative effects, that actually they wake up refreshed, that they don't have a dry mouth, that they have instead of having nightmares, they may dream romantic dreams. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but with that, those are the effects that we can understand easily. But we should also realize that one of the main reasons why we are asleep is to clean the brain from toxins, from waste products accumulated during the day. In our body, we have the lymphatic system to keep our body clean from toxins, right? But the brain during daytime is constantly active, so there is no lymphatic system in the brain, but there is a glymphatic system, and it's not long ago since it was discovered. And the glymphatic system is mainly active at nighttime. So if you have this restless sleep, putting your body in a more sympathetic state, more fight and flight state, then this glymphatic system can't do its job. So you may over time end up with a brain that doesn't function optimally because you don't get that recovery at sleep.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've tested it out, Roman and me. Well, we started with mouth taping, and now we're sleeping with the face former. And that's also like a thing that you put in your mouth, and then you cannot breathe through the mouth, and it's really
exactly. There are many different
helpful.
ways to achieve nasal breathing while asleep. Yes.
Yeah. So we want to talk today about CO₂ therapy. So I was wondering, like, how are the two connected? Like, what does nasal breathing tell us about CO₂, or is there a connection?
Yes. So CO₂ has a bit of a bad reputation.
Yes.
Oh, isn't that just a waste product that we should just exhale? But in my view, there is no such thing as a good guy or a bad guy. It's all about balance. It's a dance. It's yin and yang. It's back and forth. And when it comes to breathing, this dance is about oxygen and carbon dioxide. So oxygen is what we inhale, carbon dioxide is produced in our body, and that is what we exhale. And when we have our mouth open, for example, then we will exhale more carbon dioxide than is produced in our body because we engage in overbreathing. Mouth breathing at rest leads to overbreathing, meaning that the breathing exceeds our metabolic demand. So we will take in a little too much oxygen and we will exhale a little too much carbon dioxide. And the idea that CO₂ or carbon dioxide is just a waste product is, in my view, as far from the truth as you can possibly come. It has so many important functions in our body. And if we just start with one, what makes us take the next breath? It is not lack of oxygen. It is not the body that reacts to lower levels of oxygen if we stop breathing. it's actually the build-up of CO₂ that makes us take the next breath. So in our brainstem, we have these different survival functions controlling heartbeat and digestion and also our breathing. And in the breathing center, in the brainstem, the levels of CO₂ are monitored. So when the CO₂ is produced in our body and reaches a certain level, it will trigger a new breath. And on the following exhale, we will exhale the excess CO₂. So when we overbreathe, we will breathe out too much CO₂, and then we will reset the breathing center to basically tolerate lower levels of CO₂, which will translate to faster breathing, which is the hallmark of stress. If we will illustrate, right? Open mouth, chest breathing, fast and irregular, those are typical signs of an inner terrain that is out of balance. And CO₂ also has a widening, relaxing effect on the smooth muscle. And those are the muscles that we cannot control by will compared to the skeletal muscles that we can move around. So the smooth muscles, they are very important. And when they live in an environment that is low in CO₂, they start to constrict, cramp, if you like. In asthma, we call it bronchospasms. That's the smooth muscles surrounding the airways that goes into cramp, leading to more narrow airways. In the blood vessels, we call it angina pectoris. That is when the blood vessels go into cramp, and that happens when they live in an environment which is low in CO₂. When it comes to our intestines, when we have achy stomach pain, that, well, of course, it could be because we ate something inappropriate, but it could also be because we have low levels of CO₂, and CO₂ is very, very important for the digestion.
Super
So
interesting.
the brain is in charge of our whole body. There was a study in the World War I where they looked at soldiers who were starving. They were starving and they died. And then they examined them and they saw that all the organs had shrunken. They got smaller. And that was because they didn't have food. But all the organs except the brain. The brain was in charge, so the brain made sure that whatever nutrients was available went to the brain. So the brain is always in charge. And if we think about it then, that CO₂, if you have optimum levels, it will maintain open blood vessels. That means that CO₂ is the main regulator of blood flow to your brain. So the organ that will suffer the most when we have this stressful breathing, now I'm exaggerating, what most people engage in is a low-grade, invisible form of hyperventilation. It doesn't even have to be mouth open, it could be through the nose. Just that we engage in the shallow breathing is enough to engage in overbreathing. And that is typically common for a person sitting in front of the computer with a slumped posture, or sitting in the sofa watching an action movie or watching the news, which usually is negative news, inducing a stress and fight-flight state, right? Which will be reflected in our breath. So anyway, the brain will really suffer, so it can't orchestrate the body. It will start to make wrong decisions. The brain will shrink. So that knowledge is even used in brain surgery. The surgeon puts the patient in a slight form of hyperventilation in order to shrink the brain. So the slight form of hyperventilation reduces the CO₂, because the person will exhale more CO₂, and that will constrict the blood vessels, less blood to the brain will shrink, the surgeon is happy because there will be more room for the surgical instruments, there will be less bleeding. But no one, when we're awake, we want to have a smaller brain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
what does it actually mean if we have a shrunken brain, that we cannot concentrate, or does it mean that we're in a low mood or brain fog, or
All kinds of things, right? We get more stupid. Watch any Hollywood movie and the actor trying to characterize someone that is not so smart. What is the typical? That's the mouth open. Actually, so we get a little more stupid. We get a little more stressed. We get a little more on the edge, more adrenaline, more short-term survival, less of the long-term beneficial decisions. So that is one of our ideas, that even though conscious breathing concept is a health and performance project, it's also a peace project. People will get more calm on the inside. If we think about it, oxygen is the activating. That's what we need. But carbon dioxide is the relaxing. That's the balance we need to have between the activating and the relaxing. So inhale, we take in oxygen that is tied to sympathetic, to activation, while exhale, that is tied to parasympathetic, relaxation. So over time, there aren't many research talking about this that I have found. A lot of what I'm saying now is based on research. We have, for example, on our website, the CO₂ Academy, where we list more than 300 scientific papers, mainly about CO₂ and breathing. Mm-hmm. And over time, there is a risk, right? If you deprive your body of your brain of blood and oxygen, that you may start to get into issues like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson, like ADHD. All of the diseases of the brain could potentially. So this is not rooted in science, what I'm saying now. It's just a hypothesis. But it makes sense, I think, that if you have issues coming from the brain, maybe you should look at the blood flow to the brain to start with.
Yeah. So what would you in general say, like who would benefit from CO₂ therapy? Like who would you recommend? Or if somebody says, yeah, I have this, I have that, what are the symptoms that you say this is really a good case for going to CO₂ therapy?
Well, in general, we say that our concept is for everyone who is breathing. To start with, everyone would benefit. But if we see where people seem to benefit the most, for example, we have this device, the CarboHaler, where you inhale extra CO₂. Typically, they report more mental clarity, less stress. They feel the airways are more open. When they exercise, they have more endurance. Stronger and they recover faster. So athletes, for sure, or whether that is elite athletes or just recreational athletes doing it for fun, but also people that have issues like anxiety, stress.
Yeah. So if you have trouble maybe concentrating while you're working. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was one of the thing I noticed, that I was able to concentrate more. So another hypothesis is that when I spend most of my working days in front of the computer, and before I would say I needed more breaks. I needed to go away, and I think it was my brain needing a break, because which is very common. We either switch between holding our breath or breathing too fast. Both of them will disrupt the delivery of oxygen to the brain. And then the brain goes, we can't have it like this. We need a coffee, we need to go to the toilet, we need to call our best friend, we need to do this, we need to do that. And we're always finding excuses to have that next break. But what I found is that I need a lot less breaks. It's like my brain, if I give my brain what it wants the most, which is oxygen, and in order to give it that, obviously we need to have the blood flow. And the key to oxygen delivery then to the brain is CO₂. So in a way, oxygen is useless without CO₂, because we don't get the oxygen delivered to where it's supposed to be delivered unless we have enough levels of CO₂. So I found, and many feedback from many other of our course participants or people that have purchased our products say the same, that they are less angry, they can concentrate and focus better. And I think it has to do with this steady supply of oxygen to the brain. When you start to become aware of your breathing habits, then you can start to change them. And if you realize that you are holding your breath a lot, which is very common, at nighttime we call it sleep apnea, right? Mm-hmm. At daytime, I think we can call it concentration apnea or computer apnea or email apnea or text message apnea or whatever you want apnea, basically. It's so common that whenever we engage in something, we hold our breath.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was small, I was playing piano, and we had piano, like recitals or like where we would play for an audience.
Yeah.
And I remember I held my breath so long that I started shaking and I could not almost play piano anymore.
Right.
And then my teacher told me, like, you are holding your breath, and I didn't even realize it.
No.
So yeah, that's
and
how.
And from a digestion perspective, I mean, when we hold one of the main muscles for digestion is actually the diaphragm. The diaphragm moving up and down 1,000 times an hour is hugely important for the motility in the digestive system, for stimulating, for massaging all the organs from the stomach to the liver to the intestines. But if we hold our breath or if we have this shallow breathing, the body doesn't get that massage. So if stress breathing equals high chest breathing, also stress stomach equals high chest breathing, because then we are not engaging the diaphragm. So then we can develop stomach issues.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that breathing is the root cause. It could be a trauma, right? Or it could be a piano lesson or where you want to perform. But the good thing is with the breathing that it's actually a reflection of the status inside of us. And it's a great tool. We can view our breath as a tool to affect our nervous system, to affect our inner environment by changing the breathing, by becoming aware of it. Oh, right, I'm holding my breath. Maybe that is the reason why I have this upset stomach.
Yeah.
What happens if I start to breathe low and slow, engaging my diaphragm? What happens if I start to breathe through my nose?
Yeah.
And please note, I'm not saying that it's the only solution, right? All the other things are, of course, very important. What we eat, what we drink, how we sleep and exercise, and also the traumas we carry. If we have tons of unhealed traumas, we may not get that much benefit from breathing, but it can help us to slow down long enough in order to start taking action, trying to heal these traumas, going to see a therapist or whatever intervention is out there.
Yeah, and I do think also what you said about, if the mood improves, or you feel a little bit more optimistic, then you're more willing also to do other measures. Because for many people, changing their diet or doing stuff like that is almost a step that is too far out of what they're doing right now, and they don't even have the capacity or the power to do so. Like if you're always low on energy, because gut problems, especially chronic problems, will get you very low on energy.
Yeah.
And then if you can do something that gives you a bit more energy, then you're also willing to do other therapies or other measures.
Exactly. Everything we should do requires energy, and if we don't have the energy, we will never get off the ground and do what we maybe mentally know that we should do that is beneficial for us. And in my view, energy is like if I'm running a company, if I have too low income, it's not good. If I have too high cost, it's not good. So typically in our body, when we have low energy, we have both of them. We have problem producing energy efficiently, and we are wasting too much energy on inefficient procedures, or whatever we want to call it. And typically when we engage in worry, anxiety, stress, we waste tons of energy. We may not think of it like that, but already there, that indicates an overactive brain, which means that there is less resources over to do what we need to do. And breathing is very interesting in this aspect because it's the whole foundation for the efficient energy production. We need oxygen to produce energy efficiently. If we produce energy without oxygen, we call that anaerobic energy production, and that will only last us for a little while because we can only extract about 5-6% of the available energy in the food we eat without oxygen. With oxygen we can extract up to 100%. So that's the reason actually why we die if we stop breathing. We die of lack of energy because the body has to rely on anaerobic energy production, which can't sustain life. Well, it can sustain life, but not complex life like a human being.
Okay. And another thing that we need oxygen for is losing weight. Like weight loss is really super important, and
Yes,
I think that's maybe also could be a benefit of the CO₂ therapy.
absolutely, because when you do this energy production, if you don't have enough oxygen available, then the body has to turn to sugar. You can't burn fat without oxygen. You need oxygen. So I said in the beginning that when we overbreathe, we take in more oxygen. And you may think, right, but then I have a lot of oxygen. But actually you don't, because when you at the same time you exhale extra CO₂, the blood vessels will constrict. So there will not be blood flowing to all parts of the body. So that is one thing. Another thing is what is called the Bohr effect. And that means that CO₂ is required in order to have the oxygen leave the hemoglobin. So the oxygen in the lungs, they are attached to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin holds tight to the oxygen to absorb the oxygen. And then the oxygen travels out in the body. But then at some point we want the oxygen to leave the hemoglobin. We want the hemoglobin to change shape from holding tight to oxygen to releasing the oxygen. And carbon dioxide plays a very important role in that process. So low CO₂ will actually lower the delivery of oxygen. Because the vasoconstriction, because of the Bohr effect, where
there's so many how do you say, like indications or so many different things that sometimes you don't think about it, and it's so complex. And that's also why I say even gut health, that is our subject, but you cannot just stay in that realm because there's so many other things that influence it. And also, like, a lot of people who have gut problems have stress problems and have inflammation in the body, etc. So I'm a big fan of really tackling a problem from different angles.
Yes, exactly. And also, Julia, talking about energy, when we do this slight overbreathing, we haven't thought about it usually. We said earlier, CO₂ is considered the bad guy. It has a bad reputation. And oxygen is the opposite. Oxygen is our savior. But what very few of us think about is that oxygen is extremely reactive. And that's why we benefit from it in this energy production process. We can use it to our advantage. But what also oxygen does is that it creates oxidative stress, these free oxygen radicals, which leads to inflammations. And when we engage in slight hyperventilation, we take in more oxygen, and we then increase the risk of more of these free radicals. So from an energy perspective, we need to activate the immune system to to fight off these inflammations. So again, it's not very smart, it's not very efficient to have too much oxygen. That's the reason why, or one of the reasons I should say, why we store so extremely little oxygen in our body so that we only survive for a few minutes. Most likely it is because of its extreme reactivity, that the body doesn't want more than absolutely necessary.
Yeah. So if we think now back to CO₂ therapy, one question is like, what is the difference? You said like you can inhale it with the CardiHaler.
Yeah.
CarboHaler, and you can also take like a bath in it with the CardiSuit, so
Yes.
that it comes through the skin. So what is the difference of the two, or what would you say is?
So when inhaling extra CO₂, that affects the airways, the lungs. You increase the levels of CO₂ there. So you facilitate the gas exchange, but also inhaling, when you use the nose when inhaling, which is what we suggest people do, the nose is in direct contact with the brain. It's the only of our senses that transmit information unfiltered to the brain. Our nose is, or this sense of smell, it's the first developed of our senses. So it's very, very important for us. Something we also seem to have forgotten, that studies even suggest that we choose our partner based on how they smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it seems to be a bit important, this sense of smell. And the nose is then also in contact with our amygdala, which is the part of the brain where we store our fears and worries. And it's also in contact with the hippocampus, the center for short-term memory. So it seems like when you inhale CO₂, specifically we have seen that it probably affects the amygdala. So just as we have the breathing center where we have chemoreceptors checking the levels of CO₂ and makes us take the next breath, these same chemoreceptors, they are also in the amygdala. So the amygdala, our fear center, is just as sensitive to CO₂ as our breathing center. So they basically go hand in hand. That's why studies show that there is such a close connection between our emotions and our breathing. So it seems like when you inhale extra CO₂, you reprogram the amygdala to perceive the world as less fearful. There are many studies showing that when you inhale huge amounts of CO₂, like 20 or 30% CO₂, which is up to 100,000 times more almost than what we normally inhale, you can get into a panic attack. So it's all about dosage, but that tells us that yes, the amygdala is affected. It's very sensitive to CO₂. So it's all about dosage. So we instruct our users to start off slowly and get used to the sensation, to then, similar to going to the gym, if you're very unfit, you wouldn't start with pushing yourself like crazy, going for 100 push-ups or whatever. If you do, you will probably never return. So
Yeah.
the best advice is to start according to your ability, right? And slowly build up. And it's the same with this idea with the CO₂ tolerance, and specifically if you have these anxious thoughts, these high levels of stress, you may have developed lower tolerance for CO₂, both in the breathing center, in the brainstem, and also in the amygdala. So then you need to slowly build up that tolerance.
Yeah.
So that's what you achieve when you inhale CO₂. And also a lot of people say more mental clarity, like almost some say to the point where they get a kick, like they feel high. And you know, when people exercise, they talk about runner's high.
Yes.
I think it's the same thing. I think it is spelled CO₂, because as we talked about before, CO₂ is the main regulator of blood flow to the brain.
Yeah.
So when you get runner's high, when you run, you produce more CO₂.
I
And
see.
if you at the same time not breathe like crazy. Unfortunately, many people, when they're out jogging, when I'm out jogging and I meet people, they breathe like crazy. So if you're out running, you produce more CO₂ because your metabolism increases. And if you at the same time pay a little attention to your breathing, maybe it's not possible to breathe through your nose initially, but it's possible to train that ability. So when you do that, you try to not breathe like crazy. You try to breathe in a more controlled fashion. There is a higher chance that you will achieve this runner's high because you accumulate more CO₂ in your body. You train your body to tolerate more CO₂.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the CardiHaler, where you inhale extra CO₂, and then the CardiSuit. It's like a diving suit. You put it on, and then you absorb CO₂ through the skin because you fill up this suit with 100% CO₂. And you lay down, you may have some nice music, you may have a sleep mask, so you get into this la la land. A lot of people fall asleep, and we call it a parasympathetic deluxe experience. People get really, really relaxed. So I would say that is the main thing that happens when you do the suit. And also you get relaxed. Also you get, for athletes for example, when they use it, they recover a lot faster. And another hypothesis I have is that when people exercise and they get the next day they get aching muscles, and we have all kinds of theories. We think maybe it's lactic acid. I think it's actually an excess of oxygen that leads to more free radicals. Yes, because then we think we need antioxidants. So if we train, we get oxidative stress. We think we need to break down the body in order for the body to respond by building bigger muscles. I'm not so certain about that. An analogy for that would be if a 10-year-old going to school and learning to math, the teacher needs to hit him in the head in order for him to understand that he should learn math. I think there is the stick and the carrot. You can also, by gently helping the body to just by challenge it in the body in a little way. A lot of people challenge our body. We put too much stress because we think we need the stress in order for the body to adapt. Yes, stress is good, but I think we maybe can lower that stress a little bit and do it in a way that we don't run over our body necessarily. So when you get these aching muscles the next day after a tough workout, I think it has to do with oxidative stress, more inflammations, because most people don't pay attention to their breathing when they exercise. And typically, if you do high intense exercise, there is a high risk you will totally lose your breathing, and it will be very forceful and very fast. And not only during the exercise itself, also after the exercise, you may continue this overbreathing, leading to more oxidative stress. And the other side of that coin is that there will be less CO₂ to protect you from the oxidative stress, because the antioxidants that we think are only maybe in the food we eat is also available actually in CO₂. So again, CO₂ and oxygen, they are the yin and yang, activating and relaxing. CO₂ is protecting the body from the oxidative stress. It's a very powerful antioxidant actually.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. So some athletes say, for example, we have the games, the football players say in the German national team, we usually play games in the weekends, and then maybe on the Wednesday or the Thursday we have a really tough, intense workouts, and then I go 30 minutes in the CardiSuit, and it's like I haven't even trained when I get out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
And maybe also I should mention that there is an effect on the skin issue, on the skin. So when we have skin issues, and the whole concept of this CO₂ bathing therapy, it comes from hot springs, where they have discovered that the main active ingredients in hot springs is high levels of carbon dioxide. And how can we mimic that? How can we make artificial hot springs, since they are not available for everyone?
Yeah.
And the hot springs has it has been used for centuries. People go there when they are stressed, when they have circulation issues, when they have skin issues, and the hot springs can help relieve that.
Yeah.
Improve the circulation, improve the skin quality, and it has a lot to do with CO₂. So we notice as well on the skin quality that it improves when you expose it to CO₂.
Yeah, we have noticed that as well, that also cellulite can get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's nice.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I think I could talk to you for hours, but to wrap the whole thing up, I think maybe I'm hoping that we raised awareness in our audience that CO₂ is just as important as oxygen. And I would suggest that if they have questions, they can write it in the comments, and then maybe I can forward the questions to you in case there is something that they would like to know. Do you feel like we forgot to mention something in this conversation that we absolutely need to mention?
You sent me a few questions beforehand, and one of them was, is there any testimonial that you would like to highlight? And there are many, many testimonials. I think we have more than 100, like not only a sentence or two, but long testimonials where we really understand the benefits, what they have been through, how it was before, what they did, and then the effect. And one testimony I would like to mention is a woman who suffered from severe stress, PTSD, trauma, nightmares, problem sleeping for more than 10 years, taking antidepressants. And she lives in Sri Lanka, and the traffic there is I've been to Sri Lanka once, and it's a kind of, you use the horn a lot, it's quite stressful. And for her, having all this inner stress, just crossing the street could take 15, 20 minutes. Because she was so afraid. And then she got cancer, and her stress got even more problematic. She had a surgery, and she removed the cancer. It was in her intestines, and the stress was still there because she was worried that the cancer will come back. And typically she slept only 1 or 2 hours per night. Then she started with inhaling extra CO₂ and going into this CardiSuit, exposing her body to extra CO₂. And already the first night, she slept for 16 hours. She woke up at 2 in the morning, in the afternoon. And it didn't stop there. Without telling anyone, she stopped the antidepressants after 2 weeks. And she didn't have any problems with that at all, because she had found a new way to calm herself down, inhaling CO₂ or absorbing it through the skin.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few months, she had taken her own driver's license, and her husband, who said, I never get to use my car anymore, so she decided to buy her own car. And being a job where she was known for having a bad temper and usually yelling at her people in her group. She was a manager for a group of people. That turned completely to being considered the kindest boss and the most supportive boss. And because she got her sleep, she got her life back, she made a complete turn. And then they were forced earlier this year to move. They were starting a small renovation project, but then a wall fell down. So the small project turned to a renovating more or less the whole house. So they couldn't stay in there. So they had to live in a very small area for 2 months And that is stressful for anyone.
Yeah.
And for her, she managed to deal with that. But as the day went by, her symptoms started to come back, because during those 2 months, she didn't have access to the CO₂ therapy, so she couldn't do it. So after 2 months, she developed again these nightmares, these sleeping issues. Her pulse, resting pulse while sleeping, was between 105 and 110.
Wow.
And then she started with the inhaling CO₂. The first night she slept for 14 hours and the nightmares were gone. So just by doing that, she was able to get back on track. And after a few days, her resting pulse was down to 85, and it's still going down more and more to normal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Maybe one last question after your story is, does she need, or does somebody who is doing this need to inhale the CO₂ all the time then? Or is it like a lifelong therapy, or can the body also be trained to take up more CO₂, or to
Yeah, the body can absolutely be trained. So in the beginning, she started with the CardiSuit 5 times per week, and the CardiHaler 8 minutes per day, every day. But then gradually she reduced that, maybe taking the CO₂ bath once or twice per week, more for maintenance, and doing the inhalation every second or every third day.
Yeah.
But the thing that led to the coming back to the nightmares was because, of course, during these 2 months it was extremely stressful. So it slowly broke her down to the point where she got back to her previous self. But she was back on track like that, which is really interesting. But it is an interesting question you raised there, and I think it's we still need more knowledge. We're still very much in the early days here.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems if you have an issue, you maybe start off with more, and then you go down in the dosage.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Where can people find you if they are looking for you?
So consciousbreathing.com is our website. We are there, and we have Instagram and YouTube also with Conscious Breathing. So, and we have a lot of these articles on the website.
Okay. I will definitely link it in the show notes. And thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm looking forward to gathering more experience ourselves also with CO₂ therapy. And talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia, for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.